Um,
Wonderful. So if we want to get started, Dr. Quam, do you just want to tell us about yourself? Give us your background, what you've done, what you've accomplished, what you're doing now. The
yeah,
floor is
it's listening to some of the students on the call is actually very helpful to me because it reminds me of me when I was at your stage. So I graduated from Loyola Marymount in 1982, and I didn't quite know what I wanted to do, honestly. I thought I wanted to go into medicine. I wasn't really sure how. I was looking at all sorts of different things. And so I became a high school teacher, and I taught high school for 3 years, two of which I sat on a tiny little island in Micronesia called Ponape and taught high school there, which was really a lot of fun. And then while I was there, I did a lot of thinking and so forth, and decided I wanted to get back into academics and get back into medicine. So I went and got a master's degree in physiology. So PO, I hear you. I was a physiology master's major. I did my physiology and lung physiology. I'm an expert in lungs, which is probably good at the time, around the time of COVID. Unfortunately, I'd forgotten everything by now. And then from there, I decided I was going to go to medical school. So I applied to medical school at UC Irvine and attended medical school there. Had a phenomenal time in medical school. I joined Kaiser Permanente after my training in family medicine, and I worked there for virtually my entire medical career. So I worked at Kaiser Permanente for many years, practiced medicine for a long time, and then became a physician leader at Kaiser Permanente. And the nice thing about that was it allowed me the opportunity to sort of shape my future, if you will, because I got to shape the organization. And honestly, that's something that this program can help students do is to help us shape the future of how healthcare is going to be delivered. Not necessarily in huge ways, but in the many small ways that make up the huge ways that healthcare is conducted. And I'll explain a little bit more of that later. But so I became medical director of Kaiser Permanente's. At the time, it was our largest area in San Bernardino County, and ran the hospitals and clinics and medical group and everything out there. And then for my final 3 or 4 years, I ran our laboratory system, which was very interesting. So I think, James, you mentioned medical devices. I mean, the lab is like one of the places. And by the way, diagnostics in medicine is going to be one of the hottest topics in the next 5 or 6 years, more so than radiology and more so than most other things, because we're getting to the point now where we'll be able to diagnose cancer from a simple blood test. I mean, that we're already almost there. And so those are the sorts of things that are going to be really exciting. So I worked in that field for 3 or 4 years. Kaiser Permanente has an enormous laboratory system. It's one of the largest laboratory systems on the West Coast of the United States. We do about 75 million lab tests every year. And so it was fun. It was fun doing that. And then I retired and found out that there was, an opportunity to teach at Loyola Marymount, and I love teaching. And I decided to come back and teach. So I taught last semester along with Bo, the present program director, and this semester I'm mentoring some of the students, precepting some of the students on their capstone projects and helping them through their final project of the program. So that's kind of my story. A couple of you said you're not quite sure what you want to do. That's okay. You still have some runway to sort of figure that out, and I urge you to spend some time thinking about figuring that out. A lot of my friends went directly from Loyola Marymount into medical school, and that was fine. I didn't go that route. I took an extra 5 years before I landed in medical school, which, and you could say, did that slow me down? No, not at all. I think I was a better doctor because of it, because I had a little bit more life experience. I got to do a few more things. I learned a lot along the way. So if you're thinking about professional school, or if you're thinking about some other field within medicine, you have a little bit of time, figure it out. This program too, by the way, and I'll explain that a little bit more later, can can sort of fit into your goals almost no matter what they are, because we do have pre-professional students in this program as well. So Emily, I'll shut up now and let you ask the next question. Emily's the interviewer. I'm not supposed to talk too long. She's gonna
no, we're here to hear you. We don't need to hear me. But my next question for you is, what is your favorite thing about teaching at LMU?
Let's see, was it James that said you joined the healthcare field during the time of COVID? Honestly,
yes,
your timing,
correct.
It's like Charles Dickens, the best of times and the worst of times, right?
Oh yeah.
So it's the best of times because you got to really see the best and the worst of the healthcare industry during COVID, right? In the United States, healthcare is really kind of struggling, and so it's become easy to get cynical, if you will, in this time of COVID, and you see that with a lot of the frontline healthcare workers and others in the healthcare field. And what I love about teaching at Loyola Marymount is I love the students bring so much energy and so much enthusiasm, and it's actually been recharging for me in a lot of ways. At the beginning of the pandemic, I opened up a hospital in Los Angeles. I got a call from the governor's office. Governor Newsom wanted to open up these surge hospitals to handle the overflow of patients that we were expecting at the beginning of the pandemic. And so I was given the chance to open up a hospital in downtown Los Angeles that had been closed down. And in 2 or 3 weeks, we took this hospital that was an absolute disaster. It was a shuttered old hospital that was in bad shape, and we turned it into a COVID unit and worked there for about 4 months. It was very difficult, very rewarding, but very difficult. I was scared out of my wits because we didn't know anything about COVID. We didn't know how, James, you can probably relate, because we didn't know how it was really transmitted. We kind of did, but not really. We didn't really know how to protect ourselves. As physicians, we didn't even really know how to treat it. And having to make all that stuff up as you go was a tremendous opportunity. And it was hard. I mean, you really, and I feel for these frontline healthcare workers nowadays, but being back in with the students has just, it's an incredible boost. The students bring a ton of energy. They bring a ton of ideas. They shift the way that I think about the world because I'm an old guy. I learned just the other day, one of my students showed me a couple of computer programs that I didn't know about. And I thought, I wish I'd known those things. It would have made my life so much easier. So I learned a tremendous amount from the students as well. And I just love it.
Wonderful. So how do you feel that LMU's mission of serving the community and, serving the greater community is reflected within the HSC program?
So I haven't been involved I've been indirectly involved in this program for several years because I've known the program director for a while, and many of the people that I worked with at Kaiser Permanente had been through the program, and so I sort of knew of the program, and I became more directly involved about a year ago. So I've been auditing classes and sort of sitting in on lectures and so forth. And one of the things that has impressed me tremendously, and it gives me great hope for the future, is that every single class that I have audited brings in the concept of what's good for the community, what's the ethical thing to do, they really sort of embody the mission of Loyola Marymount, which is serving the community and being of service to the community, as well as nurturing the whole person, the whole student. And so seeing that sort of embodied in the classes is outstanding, because I got to tell you, you can go to graduate programs where that is not the focus. And that can be okay. Sometimes it's not. And you see that, I'll pick on MBA programs a little bit. A lot of the MBA programs, just maybe they pay lip service to that kind of ethos, but they don't necessarily incorporate it into their coursework, into their teaching. And you see the consequences of that, right? the lack of ethics and so forth. I am very confident that the students that come out of this program are not going to suffer from those kinds of issues, because it's just embedded in the program. Even in our capstone projects, our final projects that you do for the graduation from the program, they're all required to address the ethics of their project and how the project meets the ethical concerns. My major at Loyola Marymount was marine biology, really. I thought I was going to be Jacques Cousteau or something. I don't know. Fortunately, there wasn't any climate change back then, so no one was that interested in oceanography and marine biology, but I loved it. And my minor was philosophy. And so I got a great grounding in ethics at Loyola Marymount. And this program sort of continues that tradition, which is, I think, fantastic. So it's everywhere in the program, Emily.
Great. I think that's one thing that not only our HSE program touches on, but all of LMU's programs touch on. And it's so important to emphasize, because we hope that our students reflect that in the work after the program and during the program. So it's always important to touch on.
Yeah.
So actually, can you touch on a few of the capstone projects that you are working with right now to give the students an idea of what projects can come out of the program?
Yeah. I have some really great ones that I'm working on this semester. They're tough though, because they're you tend to think of engineering as these linear sort of step-by-step processes. And if you've ever worked on projects before, you know that that's not necessarily the way projects flow all the time. And so I have a range of projects. I'll give you a couple of examples. One of them is a project to reduce the waste in analyzing a certain test at the lab. And it goes all the way from how physicians order that test to how they're processed at the local lab and how they're processed at the regional reference laboratory. And the outcome of that project is going to be a significant reduction in the cost of that test and a significant reduction in the waste associated with processing those samples. So many of you have probably heard of Lean and Six Sigma and those methods of conducting projects. This program incorporates Lean directly into the process that we use to go through the project. So Lean is very focused on waste. Defects in the process, like mistakes, they're waste. So if we process a sample incorrectly, that's waste in the system. If we do too many tests, which this project is addressing, that's waste. It's overproduction waste. If you know anything about Lean, if you don't use your lab technicians properly, that's waste, because they're not operating to the full extent of their license and so forth. So we're going through this particular lab test and finding various steps along the way that are wasteful, and also various steps where there's lack of communication between the physicians who are ordering the test and the lab that is reporting on the test. And so we're trying to address those issues, remove the waste from the system, and in the process, we'll do the right test on the right patient at the right time, which is what we want to do, and no more and no less than that. So that's almost a pretty straightforward engineering, process engineering. I'll go to the other sort of extreme, and one of my students is working on burnout among nurse practitioners and PAs at a healthcare organization, and that's a little less structured, right? It's not a sort of a linear process that you just go from here to here to here to here. And so she has spent a lot of time interviewing nurse practitioners and PAs about what is it that causes them to feel so burned out. And she's come up with some really, really, really striking findings that we're going to turn into a plan for this healthcare program to address these issues. It's very touchy. It's a very touchy topic because it touches on things like leadership. It touches on things like their quality program. It touches on things like, workload. It touches on things like benefits, all pay, all these things come into contributing to burnout. And so they're very sensitive topics that she has to sort of tease, and find her way through. We had a preliminary meeting with some of the senior leaders of that organization. It's a big organization, it's a nationwide organization. They were so impressed with the work that this student had done that they're scheduling a meeting with the senior leaders for us to sort of, she's not done with her project. She still has to kind of go through a lot of the steps, but they want to know what she's finding out. So they're taking it very, very seriously. And it probably will lead to some substantial changes in the way that they sort of interact with their nurse practitioners and PAs. And as a result, the patients will get better care, right? Because you're always going to get better care if your provider of care is not sort of on edge and burned out and so forth. So there's a potential with these projects to make very, very solid and very, very impactful differences in the organizations in which the students do their projects. So that kind of gives you a range of the projects. There's a lot of stuff in between there as well. One of them is dealing with a project around processing specimens from the operating room to the pathology lab and making sure they're labeled correctly, have the right patient's name, and because you can imagine if mistakes are made along that process, it can be disastrous. So what I consider very impactful projects, and I've been in healthcare leadership for a long, long time. These are not trivial projects, or not trivial problems. They're very serious issues that need to be dealt with, and our students are kind of diving in and dealing with some of them. So it's fun.
Great, thank you. So my next question, so what sets LMU's healthcare systems engineering program apart from other programs such as like a master's in public health?
Yeah, that's a great question, because when you're thinking about a master's level program in the healthcare field, there's a lot of different options, right? There's MPH, there's MBAs, there's MHAs, there's probably 3 or 4 other ones I can't think of off the top of my head, but they used to have an MMM. I can't remember what that was, but this one is different in a lot of ways. So MHA programs, James, you said you graduated from a healthcare administration type undergraduate degree, and that deals, you can correct me if I'm wrong, by the way, so please speak up, James, but I've worked with a lot of people with MHAs. It deals more with the organizational and leadership aspects of healthcare. MPHs deal with the public health implications and taking care of large swaths of the population and creating programs that address that. This program specifically deals with defragmenting aspects of healthcare. Now, in this program, we're not going to solve the huge issue in the United States that 50 million people don't have insurance. I mean, that's beyond this program. It's beyond almost any program. That's a huge political, socio-political, economic issue that hopefully the country will figure out at some point, but so far we haven't really. We're not going to necessarily even solve the cost issues necessarily, but we'll do our part in smaller ways to contribute to those things. And so what I mean by that is our program is very specifically designed for applying practical knowledge to practical problems. So when you graduate from a program like ours, we expect you to jump right into an organization and start working on projects. Not as a project manager. You're a project manager who has lean experience. You're a project manager who has an incredible grounding in all aspects of the healthcare industry. So in the program, you will learn in what I think is great detail, how do clinics run? How do labs run? How does radiology run? What happens in the operating room and how do they run? What happens in the hospital and how do they run? What happens in the ICU? All those things, we spend a lot of time on those. Where do things go wrong in the operating room? Where do things go wrong in the lab? Where do we need more attention in radiology and so forth? And when you finish this program, you will know more about healthcare systems than almost any physician that you'll run across. You can say that with a great deal of certainty because I am a physician. And when I graduated from medical school, I didn't know anything about healthcare systems. I couldn't tell the lab. I knew what the lab did, but I had no idea how they did it. I knew what radiology did. I didn't know how they did it. When you graduate from this program, you'll know not only what they do, but how they do what they do and what they tend to measure and what works, what doesn't work. In all those fields. So it's very, very practical. A couple of you mentioned project management. It's way beyond project management. Of course, you have to know project management skills, and that's embedded into the program. Of course, you have to know lean sort of principles, and that's embedded in the program as well. But beyond that, you're going to know how all these different facets of the healthcare industry work. One of the areas that I'm interested in, and someone mentioned it, I can't remember which one of you mentioned it, is devices and industry and biotechnology and things like that. And that's another area that I think is going to be very, very important in the future. And we have faculty members who have a lot of expertise in that as well. I'll tell you one more thing, Emily, that really kind of sets us apart is the faculty. I don't think you'll find another master's level program that has, I think now we have 5 physicians on the faculty. So you're hearing it directly from people who do the work. It's not theoretical. This is what we do. I don't think you'll find, we have faculty members who have worked at the highest levels of the top healthcare organizations in the country. So one of our faculty members is right now consulting with the Veterans Administration on IT issues. He is an amazing resource. I mean, I knew him. He used to work for Kaiser Permanente years ago, and I kind of knew him then. And now I'm teaching with him, and he knows everybody in the industry. Every time I bring up a name of an organization, he says, "Oh yeah, I know the executive director. Oh yeah, I know them." And so having those connections, I think, is very, very important. The other thing I noticed is that in his class, there's another gentleman who I'm sitting in his class this semester who does IT issues. And he's an amazing informatics type of person. If students are interested in that aspect, they will take them aside after class and say, "What do you want to do? Tell me what direction you want to go to, and I'll help you form the connections you need to get there." And so and I'm the same way. I mean, I have a couple of students who want to go to professional school. I say, "Well, let's talk about that and let's see how you can get there and how we can help you get there," and so forth. So I think you're going to find a lot of involvement, a lot of sort of hands-on personal involvement with the faculty. I'm not sure you get that in a lot of places. And I don't think, I've looked at a lot of there are a few other healthcare systems engineering type programs in the United States, and I've sifted through them over the last weeks or so, and none of them have the faculty that we have. None of them have the sort of breadth and depth of education I think that you get at Loyola Marymount. And I honestly, I don't just say that because I'm here. We really dove into some of them. This is a very, very unique program because of its faculty, because of its foundation, and because of its connections with the industry. I mean, we're very, very, very closely connected with the industry. The fact that we have 3 or 4 physicians who are still practicing on the faculty. I'm not practicing anymore, full disclosure, except I give advice to my family all the time. But I have a huge family, so I get phone calls all the time. But we have 2 or 3 faculty members who are still practicing, and so they're right in the thick of things. They'll tell you what's going on.
Great, thank you for that. And my last question. So after I ask this question, the floor is open to anybody else if you have questions. So feel free to think of them, unmute yourself and ask, or type in the chat. But my last question is, so what are the types of job opportunities that you see students receiving and that are available to students, once they receive their HSE degree?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was talking with the dean this morning, and we were talking about the fact that this is called an engineering degree. I don't want you to be scared by the engineering moniker. There's no math, okay? Well, maybe there's one mathematical formula that we went over. It's not a traditional engineering degree in that regard. However, I'm kind of happy that it has the word engineering attached to it, because it adds a level of cachet, if you will, to the degree. And also the roots of this program are in the engineering field, because those of you who are engineers or who have worked with engineers know that systems engineering is a very, very distinct and well-recognized part of engineering. And in fact, Loyola Marymount has a traditional systems engineering, more engineering-based systems engineering program as well. It's very highly regarded. This program is a version of that has been sort of distilled down in a way that makes it more applicable to healthcare. Because in the healthcare industry, there isn't a huge amount of time and there isn't a huge amount of money. It's not as if we're building a new defense system where the budget is in the hundreds of millions and maybe more dollars. We're working on projects that might have a very limited budget, so we can't do these huge systems engineering. We had to sort of distill it down and in a way that made it very, very practical, and in a way that will be very useful to the organizations that you end up in. So, in answer to the question, though, where do people end up? Project analyst type positions are very, very common. We have, in fact, one of my students is being precepted by a former graduate of the program, which is very, very helpful. And she works at a large laboratory herself, and she works on projects. She essentially applies what she learned at Loyola Marymount University and works on projects. That's a very common place for people to land. Some students do end up in graduate school, and you might say, oh, maybe that's a waste because they went and got this master's degree. No, it's not a waste. It's actually very, very good, because the more physicians assistants, nurse practitioners, we even have a veterinarian this year. The more of those kinds of people that go into this kind of field, the better the field will eventually become. Because healthcare, raise your hand if you've ever experienced the fragmentation of healthcare. I know every one of you, or if you were honest, would raise their hand, because you've been in situations where, things maybe didn't go smoothly, or you had to put in so much effort to get something fairly simple done, or the lab called you and said, we lost your blood sample, sorry, you have to come in and do it again. Or all those sorts of things are examples of waste in the system that these systems engineers help to improve. So most people do end up in this program, in project analyst type positions. Some will end up in formal project management positions, but specifically around healthcare issues as well. And what we're trying to do as faculty members, and me with my connections and the other faculty members with their connections, is really raise the profile of this program so that so the industry will value it in the way that it needs to be valued, because it is truly a master's level systems engineering program. I have to say too, the other beauty of this is it's designed for working professionals as well. So we always have a few nurses in the program, because nurses end up in all sorts of leadership positions throughout healthcare. And it's very helpful to have them with this sort of have nurses with this sort of background as well. And because this program is designed for working people, with a lot of effort, it can be done in a year, which is kind of nice. in a way. If you, some people stretch it out a little bit longer, but it's possible to, with you know, by applying maximal effort to the program, that you can get through it in 1 year, which is quite nice.
Great, thank you. So those are all my questions. I do want to open the floor to everybody else. Feel free to pick his brain, ask away. He's here to really give you a better idea of the program, even ask him about himself, whatever you're thinking.
I actually have a quick question.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about this, and what are the characteristics of the top students that you see in your program? And I don't mean just like, you know, obviously studying night and day and everything like that, but
that's a great question, James, and it goes way beyond studying night and day, because the model itself, the present program director will call it heuristic, meaning that it's fairly intuitive, you know what I mean? And it's kind of like project management. It's fairly intuitive, but the students who do the best are the ones who are enthusiastic about this, number one, but also have the ability to communicate, the ability to be appropriately assertive in a very respectful way. And I think you know what I mean. You've been working in the healthcare field now for a year or two or three, and to have that ability to speak up and have that ability to be able to dive into projects and not sort of be standing on the sidelines is very, very important. So the students that I see doing very, very, you know, top students in the program are the ones that are appropriately assertive, but very, very courteous and professional all the time, but able to get their point across and able to make a point in a way that top level executives can hear. Because all of you have probably been in front of a top level boss or executive or something like that, and it can be very intimidating, right? And to be able to go in front of a group like that and say, here's what we've analyzed this problem, we've analyzed alternatives for solutions, we've done a lot of background work, and here's what we think we should do to move forward. That has to be said very clearly and very assertively, if you will, but not in a overconfident, cocky way. And so the students that are able to thread that needle do very, very well. And it's such a joy to watch a student who was an undergrad last year pick up those skills along the way, because you do pick up those skills along the way in this program because you are constantly presenting things. We expect participation in the classes, even though the classes can be done completely remotely at this point. We still expect the students to participate via Zoom and contribute to the community that we're forming in the classroom. The students have projects in not just the Capstone projects, but in some of the other classes, there are projects that the students themselves manage and present at the end of the semester. So last year we did a project on vaccine hesitancy. So the students dove into all the reasons why people don't want to get vaccines. And you can imagine how rich that conversation was, because it was everything from politics to religion. I mean, we had to like walk on eggshells around a lot of these topics because they're very hot topics right now. But they did a wonderful job, and they presented it to me and the other professors at the end of the semester. It was fantastic. The year before that, they did a project on sort of the failures of the United States government to protect its citizens during the pandemic, and the sort of the failure of the government's initial response to the pandemic. Once again, that's a tough topic, right? Because there's a lot of politics involved in that as well. And the students did a wonderful job of presenting that in a very respectful but very direct way. And so you'll learn those skills as you go through the program. And my expectation is when you finish the program, you'll be polished. When you give your capstone presentation, which generally lasts, the whole presentation is 45 minutes or so, maybe a little longer. that presentation is spot on, and it is rehearsed, and it's as if you're presenting a TED talk to me about your project, and the students, they step up to the plate. I mean, it's amazing. I've listened to probably a dozen or more of them over the last year, and been just blown out of the water. And to think, gosh, this student was an undergrad last year, and I'm trying to put myself in an undergrad position, thinking, would I have been able to do this? I'm not sure. But those are the students that really do well, James, in this program. It's fun to watch.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
I was kind of curious about the capstone projects and like the scale of the projects that the students end up creating, as well as the kind of supports they get in creating these capstone projects. Because like you said, you were also surprised by how much work they were doing. So I was just kind of curious, like what kind of supports they got and how like, yeah, I guess the school supports that process.
Yeah. So this program is sort of geared towards smaller projects. They're not sort of huge reinventing the wheel type projects. They're not solving healthcare for the entire country type projects. They are things like how do we get a sample from point A to point B without making a mistake in labeling and processing and handling and all that kind of stuff. So the projects themselves are meant to be very manageable. They're meant to have at the most 5 or 6 groups of stakeholders, if you know what I mean. So we're not talking about having 100 people to have to talk to get through the project. We're talking about maybe having 4 or 5 groups of people to talk to get through the project, and we purposely limit the scope of the projects to that scale so that they're very, very doable. They generally don't include the implementation phase, because implementation, for those of you who work in the field, know that can often be a 1 or 2 or 3 year process. Some students do have projects that get somewhat implemented during that semester because their suggestions are so spot on that it just makes sense to do them. But for the most part, the projects are not implemented. They're given to the organization that sponsors the student for them to implement at that point. And that's really because it just takes, the implementation takes longer. And it's also it's sort of a different skill than the engineering of the process. The supports are, I have 5 students that I'm proctoring this year. We have 2 other professors this semester who each have 3 or 4 students as well, I think. And I have weekly meetings with my students, as well as anytime they want to call me or whatever, they can hit me up. I attend a lot of the meetings that they go to with their sponsoring organization, just in case they get stuck or if they need help with how to approach asking questions or interviewing or things like that. I sort of sit in the background, just maybe give them advice for a lot of the meetings that they attend. I look at their work, their sort of PowerPoint presentation on a regular basis every week, and say, hey, this is coming along fine. This needs a little bit of work over here. And because I honestly don't want to look, I don't want to have egg on my face, because if my students don't do a good presentation, it's on me as well. And so I want to, and by the way, the rest of the faculty feels the same way too. So I want to make sure that you succeed, and I want to make sure that you have everything you need to succeed. The sponsoring organizations provide a lot of support as well. So I have one student who has an office and the whole setup, at her sponsoring organization. That's a little bit unusual, but it's nice. So you'll always be meeting with preceptors from the actual organization that you're with, as well as your preceptor from Loyola Marymount on a very regular basis. Weekly is what I do. Some professors do a little less. but I like to kind of stay on top of things. The projects themselves, we cull from the industry. So we have a lot of contacts in various healthcare organizations, and we have one class that's no credit, no tuition, and all it is a 2-hour class where we go over all the projects, and then the students are able to rank the projects that they're interested in, and we try to match them as best we can with the kind of project they're interested in. There's no guarantees because there aren't an unlimited number of projects. However, if you have contacts in the healthcare industry already and you have a project that you think would be worthwhile yourself as a student, you can let us know, and we'll see if it works, within the constraints of the program, and make sure that you have the support with the organization to do it. And we've had students do that as well. So if you have contacts, it's possible that you could suggest your own program, your own capstone project. But for the most part, our students get projects from the big pool of projects that we solicit from our industry leaders. And it's funny, some of the projects you think, that one doesn't look that interesting. I'm not kidding. As soon as the students start diving into it, it's like, oh, that's interesting. They start uncovering all these things that really bring these projects to life. So it's fun.
Great. So if anyone has any other questions, I'll stay here or stay on until 6 p.m. Feel free to still keep asking questions, but if not, thank you all so much for coming. We really appreciate it. I hope you learned as much as you possibly could, and you really have a better picture of our program and of our faculty. So thank you so much. Everyone have a wonderful night.
Yes, thank you. And by the way, if you want to look a little bit more deeply, go on our website. There's a lot it's very information rich. In fact, if you just Google LMU SHEG, it'll be the first entry that'll come up, and it'll be the web. It has some of the capstone projects on there as well. So if you kind of want to know what these projects are like and how they're presented and so forth, it's not a bad idea to take a look at a couple of those just to see what you're getting into with this program. And thank you. I really appreciate the interest. This has been a fun conversation, and I would love nothing more than to see some of you in our classes next semester. And please feel free to reach out to Emily or any of us if you have further questions. And by the way, I want to also thank Dr. Nazmul Ullah, who's the assistant dean of the college, for joining us tonight as well. Thanks, Nazmul.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful night.